It's time for the one and only Richard Southern here with the top business news stories of the day. And Richard, good news for people who want to get their Canadian news. There's a deal with Google.
Yeah, this is big because Google was threatening, Cynthia, to block Canadian news from its search engine, and that would be devastating to Canadian news operations.
Yes.
That's
tough for people who want news, tough for news operations.
Yeah, because when I'm looking for news, I a lot of time click that news tab on Google, right, and looking for it that way. Google had said it would remove links to Canadian news in response to the Online News Act, which is set to take effect in a couple of weeks. Canadian news operations said they produce the news at their own cost, but companies like Google, they make big money off the clicks without paying the newsrooms. That's what the federal government's been trying to change, and it is changing. This agreement will see Google pay Canadian news companies about $100 million a year. So it's
interesting.
It's not clear how that's going to be divvied up, but that's certainly a big chunk of change.
But I also want to know who qualifies, right? Like there are a lot of very small publications. There are a lot of big organizations as well.
Yeah, and obviously the smaller ones, the local papers, are in dire need of help. We don't have those details yet. It's less than the federal government was looking for. They wanted like something on the order of $172 million from Google.
Okay.
But it is a deal. Meta, the Facebook and Instagram parent, they have blocked Canadian news. They say they're not talking to the government about this and won't until the government scraps this bill.
So we're in a showdown.
We are with them. But Google, we got a deal.
And what's next on your deck?
Oh, yes, we are looking at interest rates. Biggest business news story of the year,
Killing people with mortgages, variable mortgages, and lines of credit, etc.
Now, a prominent Canadian economist, David Rosenberg, is out and he says he thinks the Bank of Canada is going to have to cut rates quickly because of high household debt levels. Canadians are struggling, not with only with mortgages, but with their lines of credit. He thinks the bank's going to have to cut 3 percentage points to avoid a severe recession. Rosenberg telling Bloomberg News he believes Canada is already in a recession. He says population growth has masked the recession some and has led the Bank of Canada to focus, he says, excessively on inflation.
Interesting, especially for people who are about to renew mortgages, because that could really hurt. And those mortgages are starting to come up.
They are, and people will be shocked, and many people will not be able to afford those increases.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting that we might see some cuts coming up. Speaking of interesting, one of the hotly watched stocks on Wall Street today was again GameStop. Cynthia, this is the video game retailer. They've seen sales fall in recent years, but they became a household name in January of 2021 when the stock shot to the moon. It was up hundreds of percent. The story was everyday retail investors getting together online, realizing that the stock was held short to a great degree. That meaning investors were betting that it would go lower. And they said, hey, if we all band together and buy it, we'll enact what they call a short squeeze. We'll force those investors to buy back their stock and trigger a big rally. It worked. It was a huge story.
Isn't that interesting?
Since then, though, the stock's really languished. It's fallen.
You can only sustain that so long.
You can, but today, and the last 2 days, it's back again. The short interest is up. The retail investors are doing it again. The shares rose 13% yesterday, 20% today. It's a fascinating story because it's the everyman investor winning one over on Wall Street.
I kind of like that.
It's very cool indeed. We'll see if it lasts.